Hi, this is Welcome to Self, and I'm your host, Dr. Hayley Quinn, fellow human, business owner, and the anti-burnout business coach. I'm here for service-based business owners like you to help you increase your own self-care and self-compassion, change the relationship you have with yourself and your business, and help you elevate your business to a new level so you can live the full and meaningful life you desire. We are all on a continual learning journey, so let's learn together. Welcome to Self is a place where you can come and learn about the practices that will assist you as a business owner and get tips on how to engage in your business in a way that is sustainable for you. You will realise that you're not alone in the ways that you struggle, because at times we all do. And I'm happy to share with you what I've learned through my own struggles and my experiences of running businesses. You can join me as I chat to wonderful guests and have your curiosity piqued about various topics. And I'll also bring you solo bite-sized business episodes that can easily fit into your day. This is a place to remember that you are human first and have different tasks in your business and different roles in your life that need your attention. And for that, you need to take care of yourself in the best way you can. This is a place of nourishment, growth, and helpful information. A place where you can learn ways to assist you and your business to thrive. Because remember, if you thrive, your business can too. Now let's get to the episode. So hi and welcome to another episode. I have another guest episode for you today, and it's with somebody that's previously been on the podcast. In fact, she is my first repeat guest. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Yael Schonbrun. Yael is a psychologist, an assistant professor at Brown University, and author of Work, Parent, Thrive. Her last episode on the podcast was so well received, and if you haven't already tuned in, it's episode 33. I highly recommend that you do. Yael is such a kind, compassionate, and beautiful human being that I couldn't resist getting her to come back on for another chat. She has so much wisdom and knowledge to share, and I know that you'll get a lot out of this episode. So join me as I welcome Yael back onto the podcast. Hi, Yael. Thanks so much for coming back on.
Thank you for having me. I did not know I was your first repeat guest. I'm, really honored. Thank you so much. It was an honor anyway, but this is quite something. I'm a little flushed.
Well, I think you've just got so much to offer. And what I really thought we could have a chat about today is the impact that business has on our relationships, whether that's with partners, children, friends, colleagues, whatever it might be. I know that I speak to a lot of business owners where they really notice that either they don't have the time they might want for their families, or when they do, they're not as present. So it starts to have impacts. So I thought we could have a bit of a chat about that and sort of ask you, because I know in your work as a psychologist, I imagine, you work with people who own businesses and you own a business yourself. What are the impacts that you see people are struggling with?
Right. Well, there's many levels of impacts, and I do think, and you made note of this, but one of the primary things is just that we have less resources to offer when being pulled in lots of different directions. So if you're partnered and you have a business and you have children and you have a friendship group or a spiritual community, you just feel that tug in lots of different directions, and it can feel challenging to figure out how much resource to send to each part of your life. And then you also made mention of this piece of, being present, that
Yeah.
even, and I certainly feel this at the end of a workday when I'm stepping back into parenting mode, my mind might still be occupied by some dilemma that I've had during my professional time,
Yeah.
and vice versa, right? If I had a tough drop off and I'm heading into work, it can be hard to really be fully present with patients. And then I think too that there's a lot of challenges. So I do a lot of couples therapy, and
Yeah.
if you have two people who are working and they have kids, there is often some tension around role delegation. So
Yeah.
that can be super challenging. And then people might have different ideals of what they want to be working towards. So whereas somebody might want to have high aspirations and, be ambitiously pursuing professional goals,
Yeah.
another may want to be pulling back and enjoying the day to day and traveling more. So people may be on different pages. So there's and those are just a few of the ones that
Yeah.
I'm thinking of. But I think the more roles that we occupy, the more we get pulled in lots of different directions. And yet, and this is what I talk a lot about in my book, Work, Parent, Thrive, it's not just conflict, right? There's this other side of the coin of enrichment. And I think once we recognize that, we have a better time managing the conflict
Yeah.
and amplifying the enrichment. So we can talk a bit about that too.
Yeah. Like there's so many things, just like you say, that's just a few of the things. It can impact in so many different ways, can't it? And I guess, to help, I always like to try and let my audience know that they're not alone in the struggles and challenges that they have. So I certainly speak to lots of people about these kind of impacts. How common do you think these challenges are for people?
Oh, super common. As you said
Yeah.
that, I mean, you're not alone, and I'm sure Haley and I can share our own stories, but one of the first non-academic writing I ever did, pieces of non-academic writing I did, was a piece that I wrote for the New York Times, and this was, like, something that I wrote while my kids were napping. I did not think that I was gonna write for non-academic audiences, but I just had this idea. But it was all about this struggle that I personally had where I had been on a particular trajectory and my husband had been on board and we had made plans. And then I pivoted after I became a parent and it had a huge financial impact because I pulled back
Mm,
a little bit from my professional role. Um, and we made it work, but it was stressful because we had made plans with this
yeah.
idea that I would stay full time after I became a parent. And then when I decided to do something different, it had a huge impact on the way that we were going to conduct our lives, and that was, I think, harder for him than for me because I was feeling it and I was really motivated, but I had to
Yeah.
sort of convince him that this was going to be a reasonable choice for us. So, I mean, that's just one personal story, but I just think it is really, really hard, right? You have two different people in a relationship, whether it's your partner or good friends, and as you're navigating these things, they impact everybody, and people have different ideas of how they want it to go. And yet you have to negotiate together to be on the same page, to be growing together in the same direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a really good point there. And, for you, when you'd made that decision, you'd been thinking about it. You were privy to all that information before your husband was privy to that information, right?
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think that kind of raises the point around communication. My husband and I, well, we co-own a business together, and then I have my business as well. Um, and we can get really busy. And the thing we always say to each other is like communication is key.
Yeah.
If we're going to be really busy and we're not going to be focused on the relationship side of things, we need to communicate that.
So
And for
Haley,
me,
can I ask you a question? So if you co-own a business with your husband and you disagree on work things, how this is a different issue than communicating about change, but how do you separate the relationship piece from the business piece?
that's a really, really good question, actually. And I think for me, I'm just thinking about this as I'm answering the question because I've not sort of sat and thought about that. But I think for me, I can compartmentalize things quite well. So when I am talking to him about business stuff, and whilst we co-own, he does do the majority of the thinking and decision making. Um, I think when I'm considering business stuff, I do feel like I have my business hat on. And then we might do something. And we would do things like when we're going to discuss business, we do set boundaries around that. Like we might be in a particular space in the house, like particularly if we have actually just moved, so things are a little bit different now. So that'll be interesting. We're in the process of building another house, so over the next little while, we're kind of in different spaces. So, but we would perhaps spend time actually in the office talking about those things rather than on the couch if we were going to sit in the evening watching television, or we might
Yeah.
sit at a table and talk about it so that we're
Yeah.
putting some boundaries around this is actually a business conversation.
Yeah.
And
That's
that's
such
not to
a
say it
great
doesn't leak
strategy.
out into other times, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love that strategy to sort of, put some physical, tangible space that belongs to business dealings and then to have other parts of your house that feel more non-business related. And I think that's a really great
Yeah.
way to create sort of this, permeable boundary between your business partnership and your personal
Yeah.
partnership.
Yeah. It can be tricky. Um, like many things in relationships. But again, for me, it's like communication is the key.
Yeah.
And then just really finishing those conversations. Okay, are we done with this conversation? Fine, we've kind of left that now. And then we might go and, start making dinner or sit and watch a movie
Yeah.
or whatever it might be. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I'll share that so on the topic of communication, one really terrific tip that I teach a lot of my couples in the therapy room, and that I have a piece coming out in the Washington Post in the next few weeks about this topic, which is something called conversation matching. And it's this idea that one of the things that comes up for a lot of people in partnerships and friendships, family members, whatever kind of relationship you're in, work colleagues, um, that we kind of come in with different agendas for what we want to get out of a communication. And this is certainly true when we're mixing business and personal relationships. And the two different main types of conversations are problem solving conversation and then
Mm,
an understanding conversation. And the reason that it's important to distinguish between those two is that if one person wants to problem solve because there's a problem in the business, but the other person wants to just talk about how frustrating it is,
mhm,
that if you're not on the same page, you're both gonna feel really frustrated. An example that I actually give in the therapy room about this is if I have a tough day at work and I go home and I tell my husband, "Oh, I just had a bad day and I didn't feel like I connected with my clients and I just felt incompetent as a therapist." And he says, "Well, you've been saying that a lot. Maybe it's time to get supervision." But what I was really looking for was
mm,
some sympathy and empathy and compassion. I'm gonna get frustrated with him and say, "Oh, you're so unsupportive." And he's gonna get frustrated in response because he had come in with the best of intentions to be
yeah.
supportive. And here I am undermining his efforts. And then now we're in a conflict despite the fact that we both started off with the best of intentions. The other thing that often happens, and again, this is true for business and in personal relationships, is that we might think we understand what the other person is going through or what they want or what their hopes are or what their core needs are around the conversation and drop quickly into problem solving. But if we don't sort of spend a little bit of time making sure that we do understand one another, that we're talking about the same part of the problem, that we have similar goals, then even though we're both on the same page with problem solving, we may feel frustrated because we're solving different parts or we're aiming for different ends in the problem solving conversation. And so one way that I think we can help our relationships whether it's between business and personal,
Mm,
is to be clear about what kind of conversation we're having and make sure that we're on the same page in terms of our communication agenda.
yeah. I love that. Like you say, because otherwise you're kind of coming from different angles and nobody's getting their needs met.
Yeah.
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 Gosh, there's so much we could be teaching in schools, isn't there? Whenever I have conversations with people like this, I'm like, gosh, we missed the mark. There's so much we could be teaching young people in schools.
I know. Yeah. I think a lot of the social emotional stuff that we learn as therapists and psychologists would be so valuable for our kids. My kids always tease me because I'm constantly teaching them this stuff. You'll be grateful someday.
Yeah. Just wait till you're older.
Yeah.
So if people are kind of struggling with different aspects of having their business and it impacting, what would be some tips that you kind of give people?
Well, I mean, just to start with, I think setting some boundaries, and I think you gave a really nice example of having the physical boundary, but even just clarifying, like, can I, or making a request, can I talk about a business frustration with you? Do you have the bandwidth for it or do you not? And so maybe even asking permission. But actually, you know what? Let me back up,
Yeah.
and maybe get clarity from you on what kinds of, like, give me an example of an issue that you're thinking of when you ask that question.
So say somebody is perhaps they've just started a business. Let's go with this. They've just started a relatively new business. And as we know, as business owners, that can be a really, really busy time, can be a big learning curve. It's also exciting, it's also challenging, and it can take up a lot of your cognitive space. It can be the stuff you want to think about. You can spend more hours than you might normally do in that space as well. And you might not be spending as much time perhaps with your partner or your children. You might not have enough time or energy to be doing perhaps some of the household chores that you would have been doing, and that's landing on your partner. Um, and maybe that's causing a bit of conflict.
Yeah. Well, so one piece of research that I found really interesting, I wrote about it in a recent edition of I have a weekly newsletter where I talk about the science of relationships, and this was a post that I did several weeks ago about a study that found that people often avoid confrontational kinds of conversations because they worry that they'll end badly, when in fact they tend to end much better than we anticipate. Doesn't mean that they all end well,
Yeah.
obviously, but that we tend to sort of have a negative bias in what we predict will happen. So one thing that I would say is, initiate a conversation. Hey, I just want to name it, right? That things I'm really preoccupied right now. I can see that that's falling a bit on you more than it has in the past. And I don't know how you feel about it. So okay, there's one tip. Approach the conversation. The second tip is catch your assumptions about knowing what your partner or
Mm,
whoever it is thinks, because we tend to assume too much. We're overconfident in
yeah.
what it is that we think other people are thinking. And we're actually very bad at mind reading, even with
Yeah.
people that we know well. And you may know them pretty well and you may have a guess, but the problem isn't that you don't know. The problem is that you're overconfident in how well you know. And so to just check it, right, rather than assuming and say, I have a guess as to how you might be feeling, but I'd love to hear more from you about what that's like. And then, and so now you're starting in an understanding kind of conversation. And then depending how you're feeling, maybe we can do some problem solving. So then you're naming the conversation. So the first thing is approach the conversation. The second is make sure you don't mind read. Instead, ask
Mm,
what it is that they're thinking and feeling. And the third is if there are issues, can you do problem solving together where you either renegotiate responsibilities or you make an agreement that there's some sort of a timeline where your partner is willing, you know, hopefully generously, to take on a bit more as you get your feet under you to start a business or whatever the thing is that you're feeling overwhelmed by.
yeah, that's fantastic. So approach the conversation, don't assume. And I think we often will do that, won't we? And do this thing of like, but I know what they're going to say. It's like, well, you
Yeah.
don't, you can't know what they're going to say. You need to
Yeah.
actually ask them and find
Yeah.
out what it is. Can I give you another one? We're like playing a little
Yeah.
game here, aren't we? It's like think of a
We'll see if I have
scenario
an
and Yale will solve it. No pressure.
answer.
Uh, so I'm
I'm not
thinking
sure I can.
another thing, and I work with people in my group coaching as well, business owners, and the one-on-one work that I do, because this really does come up for a lot of people. They want to be really immersed in a business. They want their business to be successful. They're doing something they enjoy, or they're trying to get through some challenges. But they really also want to make sure they've got time and space and presence for the people that they love as well, their partners, their children, their friends. Um, and you just have so much knowledge around this relationship stuff that I thought you'd be absolutely perfect to get on for this. So let's imagine now that there's somebody a business owner and a mum. So small children, perhaps, or whatever age children, really. And business is taking up time and energy. They're perhaps in a season where things are very busy and they're really feeling like they're a bit disconnected from their children, or when they are home and the children are like, Mum, 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 that it feels too much. Yeah, it feels a bit overwhelming, and they're struggling with that. What would you advise around that sort of stuff?
Well, I think you're kind of naming 2 issues that are both really important. One is the disconnection with the kids, and one is this feeling of pervasive overwhelm. And I
Yeah,
think both are really important because, the easy answer is just do more with your kids. But if you're really overwhelmed, what you really need is a little bit of off time. And I
yeah,
think that is challenging, but doable. I think
yeah,
this is something that we don't talk enough about, which is how do we, instead of just doing more, do a little bit less? And I have a chapter in Work, Parent, Thrive
yeah,
about this. That is remember to subtract, because what the science suggests is that our brains default to adding the more,
Yeah.
especially when we're overwhelmed. There's this really interesting study that was published in Nature, and one of my colleagues wrote a book. He was one of the authors on this study called Subtract. It's a terrific book. And the study shows the title of the study is something like people systematically overlook subtraction, even when it's the better choice,
Yeah.
right? When we're faced with a difficult life design choice, we tend to add instead of subtract. And when we're overwhelmed, when our cognitive load is higher, we're even more likely to neglect subtraction, even though it's the better choice, right? We have
Yeah.
too much going on. We don't think to take something off of our plate. So I think
Yeah.
number one is figure out what can come off of the plate. And to do that, values clarification is really helpful. And the best way that I like to, I shouldn't say the best way, my favorite way, I'll say, that I like to do for myself and that I teach my patients to do is to think forward 10 years from now
Yeah.
and sort of bring yourself to your 10 years from now self. Look back on this period. What would you be glad that you stood for? What would you say? Oh, I'm glad I didn't waste my time on that. Oh, or I'm really glad that I dedicated, what little time I had to this. And the same thing goes, how would I be proud of having stood for self-care and
Mm.
downtime? And what would I be proud that I let go of because it wasn't really filling my cup and it wasn't doing anything for the kind of life that I want to live? So this is an acceptance and commitment therapy kind of practice of
Yeah.
doing this looking back. And the reason that it's so helpful is that in the moment, we get so hooked on the emotions and the thoughts of I must do, and I'm
Yeah.
so anxious and I can't think clearly. But when we bring ourselves to the future, it allows us to kind of unhook from those thoughts and those feelings and get a little bit clearer on what we want to stand for. And I do think sometimes in acceptance and commitment there, we really think about the things to do. And I think to be very deliberate, knowing the science that we aren't very good at subtracting, to be very careful to also consider subtraction. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't or, that it's not wise to add, but it's
Yeah.
helpful to do that balance. And especially in parenting, I think we're so compelled by all the things that other people are doing, like all the
Yeah.
enriching activities that other kids are doing and all the ways that, parents show up for the bake sales and the shows and all those things. And it feels like you must do all of those things, but it's not fundamentally true. Like
Yeah.
nobody will be harmed. Maybe your kid will be disappointed, but that's okay. Kids should learn how to be disappointed. Or maybe
Yeah.
you'll be disappointed and that's okay. You can tolerate disappointment. But this more zoomed out perspective of what really matters. Like, does it
Yeah.
really matter that the cake pops are perfectly decorated in cellophane wrap with a ribbon? Probably not.
No.
Probably what matters more is that you have a chance to put your feet up and have a snuggle with your kid at the end of the day. And the same thing goes for work. We often feel like we need to say yes to everything. But actually, it can be very helpful to say no. It increases the respect that people have for you when you
Mm.
say, "Oh, I have too many things on my plate. I don't have space in my docket for that." It really shows that you're in high demand and those opportunities will come back. So pace yourself and recognize what's important, using that sort of 10 years, 20 years from now and looking back and clarifying your values and remembering to subtract. And
Yeah.
create and when you subtract, leave some white space, leave some quiet space.
Absolutely. That we're in my groups, I talk about diary management and how we need gaps in the diary and allocating time for self-care and just kind of nothingness.
Yes.
And also that sort of teaching people how to say no. And it's not that we don't know how to say no, we're just saying it's the wrong person, right? We're saying it to ourselves. So every time we say yes to somebody when we don't really want to, we're actually saying no to ourselves.
Yeah.
But I think this point about subtract, and recently, like I recently sold my house, we packed, we moved. I think like 4 days after moving, we went overseas, we came back. And the other day, I found myself in this kind of real sense of getting overwhelmed and like I had too much to do. And I don't normally operate like that. Like I've worked really hard over the years to come to a pace of working that really honors myself and my own well-being. And this is what I teach people. So I was kind of thinking, what's going on? And because I had had this gap and I'd had to put things on hold, it's like my mind had this sense of you've got to catch up on everything. Start adding more in because you've been, you've had about 6 weeks where you've not been working at the normal pace. You've got to add all this stuff back in. And I was like, something's just not right. And it wasn't until I stopped and realized that what was happening and started actually subtracting this, subtracting that, contacting somebody and saying, can we reschedule for a month's time? Can we do this on a different time? Actually, I'm going to put that down because it's not important to me. That I could come back to this kind of place of equilibrium again. So I'm really glad you raised that, because that's
I
what was
just wanted
happening for me. I was adding and adding and adding.
Totally, and I just wanna say, like, what's amazing about this impulse to add is that it's just so human, so you
Yeah.
know, and I know, it's
Yeah.
not wise to always add, it's very wise to subtract, and yet we still get pulled into it. I think that's the thing, it needs to be deliberate, and we need to recognize that it's not gonna happen automatically, that we need to make deliberate practices. I actually
Yeah.
couple weeks ago, I was feeling really overwhelmed, and I was talking to a friend who writes a terrific newsletter, which is called Practically Deliberate, and I was telling her, and she said, "It sounds like you need to subtract," and I was like,
Yeah.
"Okay, I do, but I'm kind of anxious about it," and I emailed a bunch of people to cancel meetings, and it
Yeah.
was fine. I said to her, "The crazy thing is we stress ourselves out so much, and it's generally not that big of a deal if you say, 'I can't make it to something.'
No.
You can always reschedule for most things, or
Yeah.
you can just say no and let that opportunity pass you by so that you can be more present for the things that really matter. But there's something in us that makes it hard, so we have
Yeah.
to be deliberate about it."
And how often, because I know this has happened to me, or the other way around, somebody's asked if they can swap something and somebody says, oh, that's perfect.
Thank
Actually, I
goodness.
was hoping that I could go do this other thing as well. So sometimes
Yeah,
we're doing somebody a favor by actually
totally.
canceling or rescheduling. And again, it's that assuming, isn't it? But they
Yeah,
will think this or they will be upset. So
yeah,
we don't know. So ask them
yeah,
or let
yeah,
people
right.
know I can't do it.
Yeah, I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed. Would it be okay? If it's really important, we can keep it, but if
Yeah.
it's okay, maybe we could reschedule.
And I think, sometimes people have this sense, and I think in some ways society has told us, if you say you're going to do something, you 100% should stick to it no matter what, or you're flaky, you're
Oh, I always
unprofessional,
have that thought. They're gonna
you're
think I'm a
unreliable
flaky.
or something. And it's
Yeah.
not. And in my experience, when you are honest with people and transparent, it strengthens the relationships you have with people. They know where they stand with you.
I think that's right. I mean, and I do think that in general, like, if you are somebody who generally shows up, that's great. The other thing is, if you are somebody who really has too much on your plate, it is hard to show up for all the things. So that is
Yeah.
also a cue to subtract. So
Yeah.
if you really are struggling, it might just be a sign that you are carrying too big of a load. And then, I know that the automatic thought for many people is, "But I can't take anything off. It's all really, really important." And I would just
Mm.
encourage people to question that. I
Mm.
mean, there are things that are absolutely fundamentally important, but there is probably areas of wiggle room. And a really terrific book that I love is called Essentialism by Greg McEwen, and it's a really nice guide for figuring out what are the essential things and what are the trivial things, and how do you know the difference? And it has a lot to do
Mm.
with values clarification.
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece, isn't it? Connecting with your values. I know for me, I grew up, my father was very successful in what he did, and it also meant he was very busy and he was away a lot. And for me, I was a single parent for 13 years. And my first year or my first semester of doing university studies when my son was, I think he was 3, and I was doing 4 subjects, and I can remember being really busy and saying to him, just go play because I had to do something. And as soon as he walked away, I just had this feeling of like, oh, that just did not feel good. So I ended up dropping my subjects, like to lower subjects. It took me a little bit longer to get my studies finished, but it meant that I could be more present. And I used to always ask myself, and I say this to people I work with, when you're about to embark on something, just ask yourself at what cost and do you want to pay the price? It could be time that you're not getting, it could be your energy, whatever it is, but at what cost? Because, like you say, we can feel like, I've got to do all the things, I've got to do all the things. Some of that's our ego as well, right?
Totally,
It's
totally.
like, I've got to do that. They asked me, It's
Yeah.
like, well, maybe
Oh,
you
yeah.
don't.
No, there's a lot of ego in it.
Yeah.
Personally. Um, I think that and that's okay. I mean, I think it's okay to do things that make you feel good. That's a great thing.
Absolutely.
But I think it's the balance of things, and you
Yeah.
wanna make sure that you're sort of feeding lots of different needs, your quality
Yeah.
connections, your ego, your ambitions.
Yeah.
And it's hard to strike the right balance, and I don't think you're ever done. It's sort of like you're balancing as you go. It's the process. I know for me, when my kids were really young, it was especially hard, and I think that's true for a lot of parents, and that's kind of what you're describing too. It gets easier as they're older because they want to be off doing their own
Yeah.
things. My youngest now is 7, and he's incredibly independent, so I'm feeling a little less useful, but I still wanna hang out with them. I'm thinking that they are wanting that less, but, um, when they were really young, that was hard, but one of the things that I talk about in Work, Parent, Thrive is that we often think that we should do it alone, the parenting
Mm.
piece, and it's actually really important for our kids and for us to involve other caregivers. Um, Anthropologists call this alloparenting, that humans are
Yeah.
wired to rear children in community. And I think that when you have a lot of pressures, work pressures or other pressures, it really presses you to engage other caregivers, which is good for your kids and good for you.
Yeah.
But again, it's that balance because as you're saying, like, it can feel really sad to sort of send your kids away, and I think that's okay, right? It's okay to feel sad and then excited to come back together, and you wanna have that come back together time, and you want that time to be really quality, but to let go of the guilt as much as you can the guilt will come up, unhook
Yeah.
from it, and say, "This is good for me, for my long-term ambitions. It's good for my child to see his parent or her parent out in the world pursuing
Yeah.
things that contribute outside of the home. And then it's lovely for us to come back together. And in fact, one piece of science that I think is really terrific is very, very ancient science. It's from like the 1800s. Emile Durkheim was this French sociologist who collected data from across Europe. And what he was looking at was risk for suicide. And what he found was that people were at lower risk for suicide when they occupied multiple different roles. And that kind of research has been borne out in hundreds of studies since then, which is that there's we feel stressed out when we're pulled in lots of different directions, but actually we also feel more fulfilled, a greater sense
Yeah.
of purpose. So it's good for us as parents to be pulled away. It's good for us as workers to be pulled to our family. And it's hard. Both are true.
Yeah.
And so just to kind of recognize you're not doing it wrong if you're struggling. You're not doing it wrong if you feel a
Yeah.
little sad to say goodbye to your kid. And it's really just a question of how you navigate that in the way that works best for you in terms of the many things that are important to you, including a quality parent child relationship and a fulfilling professional life.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've kind of talked about the sort of things people can do, but what do you think are some of the barriers that people need to just kind of tune into that might be getting in the way of them perhaps having those conversations or saying no to the things or making some changes in how they're doing business life and home life, perhaps?
Well, I'm sure that for everybody has different contextual factors that are, impinging on what they're capable of doing, like, supportive colleagues or bosses or, infrastructure that you need to get a business off the ground that can be limiting. But as a psychologist, the thing I'm most interested in is like, the internal stuff, what
Yeah.
gets in the way internally. So when I say this, I'm not suggesting that there aren't also external things that are
Yeah,
at
of
play. Of
course.
course there are. But I think one of the things that people really get caught up in is like the identity piece of like, who am I?
Yeah.
And if I can't be this kind of a person, then forget it. And we get very rigid in that, as opposed to having like a more adventurous spirit about it. I think if you're in business and trying to navigate, relationship life, you need a lot of flexibility. And so
Mhm.
it isn't going to go perfect. And to just trust that you probably will have lots of oopses along the way and that those will help you to learn and grow. So, move from a fixed mindset to a growth
Yeah.
mindset. This is a
Yeah.
concept that many people know about from academic research that, people can either have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset
Yeah.
around their capabilities in math. But actually, the same kind of conceptual framework applies to our roles in life. We can think, okay, I'm going to be a great, therapist or professor, or I'm going to be a terrible one. And in fact, what would be more useful is to say, I'm going to learn how to do better and better in whatever the endeavor is that I'm interested in doing, parenting or work or anything else. And so, not to get too rigid about how you define yourself, your self identity, or
Yeah.
your success. Um, and I do think like the shoulds, right? Which is like it
Yeah.
should be this way before I start, or I should have this kind of training, or it should feel like less of an imposter. When you're starting out anything, you'll feel like an
Yeah.
imposter. I think that, you know, just expect that kind of language because we all have it. I mean, I am decades into my career and I still sometimes feel like an imposter, but what acceptance and commitment therapy allows me to do is to say, it's okay. Like you have that thought, what do you want to do? What's
Yeah.
important to you? Can you show up even with that thought sort of, in the midst of whatever it is that you're doing? Can you kind of pay attention to whatever is more important than that thought,
Yeah.
which is generally, showing up for the things that you value.
Yeah.
So those
So
kinds of
holding
things.
lightly some of those labels. So, you know, I am my business. Is all you're not. You have a business. Um,
Yeah.
whatever that business might be. And that there's no one right way to do all this, is there? It's really about knowing yourself and tuning in and
Totally.
understanding what fits for you and your family, your relationships, the context, like you say, that you're living in and under. Um, and yeah, that we all have times where we struggle with this. We all have the I should this, I should that, but perhaps not believing everything that our mind might tell us.
Yeah.
Is they're tricky
Totally.
minds, right?
It's so tricky. And it's
Yeah.
interesting too, you take the 2 of us because 'cause we've had pretty unconventional career paths. You've started a couple of businesses and gone to university as a single mother, and
Yeah.
I started out as a full-time academic and then moved into popular writing and very now peripheral and academic, but still there. And I think exactly as you're saying, like, we get into this identity of, like, this is who I am. Like,
Yeah.
I am an academic, I am an entrepreneur, but can you sort of more flexibly relate to
Yeah.
that identity and see if there's possibilities to engineer whatever the roles are that really matter to you in ways that work for your life. Sometimes there's not, and actually that can be beneficial because it create like you don't have to recreate the wheel. Like I and you probably had to create this path for ourselves, which is a
Yeah.
heavy lift. And sometimes when there's not that flexibility, the benefit is that you just kind of step into the role as opposed to
Yeah.
having to create it. But it does mean less flexibility, which is a drawback. And I suppose the point of what I'm trying to make is that I think most paths have advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah.
And so figure out the advantages that really matter to you and the disadvantages that you can tolerate.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. Oh, I love chatting with you, Yael. I could talk to you all day. I really could. One of the
If
things, and
only
I've
we lived
actually,
on the same side of the globe, Haley.
I know, wouldn't that be the best?
We should go out for coffee one day when we're on the same side of the globe.
Absolutely. That is a date. Absolutely. Now, this is a question I ask all my guests. I have asked it you before, and I am going to remind you
What
of
did
what
I
you
say? I
said
don't
as
remember.
well. So the
Okay, good.
question is, if you were to meet your 80-year-old self, what do you think she would say to you today?
Yeah. I think I do remember what I said. I think I said slow down, right?
Yes, you said, take Hayley's advice and slow down. And you said you've got
Subtract.
lots of things that you love, but you think you'd enjoy it more and
Yeah.
do a better job and feel better about what you were doing if you slowed down. So,
Yeah.
have you managed to do that?
Um, yes and no. I think it would be interesting to ask my husband what he thinks. But yes and no. So interestingly, so the last time you and I met, I was a co-host on a podcast, Psychologists Off the Clock, which is a terrific podcast. And I can say that now even more strenuously because I'm no longer a co-host, so it doesn't sound as self-serving. But I subtracted co-hosting a podcast, which was a huge
Yeah,
dedication of time, and I loved it. But I had decided that I really wanted to enjoy my writing time and dedicate myself more deeply to thinking deeply in writing. Um, and so that has been something that's opened up a bit more time and helped me to slow down and interest. So I took off a big role, but now I write more. So on the one hand, I slowed down a little bit professionally. On the other hand, now I'm doing a lot of writing. But for me, writing feels more calming, I think because it's just
yeah,
me and my computer, and
yeah,
so there's something that, in a sense, feels slower even though there are some deadline pressures on it. The other thing I'll just mention is that my kids are actually on break this coming week. We have spring break here in Boston, and we thought about doing something, and I said, "You know what? I think I'm gonna take" because I was feeling pretty burned out from work and,
Yeah.
in the many areas that I do work, I am planning to take a few days off and just hang with them, and we're gonna try not to do
Yeah.
screens and go out for ice cream and go for a run and just have, like, a lot of hang out at a park, and I'm really
Yeah.
excited about that. So I think that my life is often chaotic during pockets, but I do make it a deliberate practice to have time where we are very quiet, and as a more regular thing, we try hard on Saturdays to not
Yeah.
have screens and to not have plans. I mean, my kids do some activities on Saturdays, I will fully admit that, but I say no to a lot of birthday parties, and we try to
Yeah.
have Saturdays be more family time as much as possible despite the soccer practices
Yeah.
that they have. So I do think my life is still full in the many ways that I really love, because as you mentioned, I really love my work. I love being a
Mhm.
psychologist. I love being a writer. I do some supervision at Brown University. I really enjoy that. I get interviewed on podcasts like yours, which is so fun, and I am a parent of 3 boys who are high
Yeah.
energy, so it feels chaotic, but I do think that the thinking about subtracting and the priority that I have on having moments of calm through in a given week and in a given day too, has really become a practice of mine, so
Yeah.
it feels balanced more of the time than it used to. It's probably still something I
Fantastic.
can improve on, though.
Yeah. Before we get back to what your 80-year-old self would say now, I just think you've raised some really lovely points. And one of them is sometimes when we are creating the life that we want to be living that feels fulfilling for us, we sometimes have to give away things that we really enjoy. Like for you with the podcast, I stepped away from a lot of my clinical work. Sometimes we have to make decisions to set aside things that we maybe really do love in service of something else that we really want to pursue. And also that, yes, life can be very busy. And at times it's going to be, particularly if you've got children, particularly if you've got 3 high energy boys. Um, and that's okay. But let's make that busyness full of things we actually want to be doing, not just busy for busy sake or busy because somebody else wants you doing those things. So I think really kind of tailoring it to, is my life full of the things that are meaningful and values aligned? And if not, what can I subtract? And at times, what can I subtract anyway? Like I've just done recently, there are things I want to be doing, but they don't need to be done right now.
Yeah.
I need to honor my own well-being right now, or I risk, heading back towards burnout, which I am not willing to do. Um, so thanks for sharing those, because I think that really does highlight the different ways life can be, but how we can make choices to make it more aligned for what we want.
Totally. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
just wanna double down on I had a lot of grief leaving the podcast. I
Yeah.
really, really loved it. It was such a terrific part of my life, and I loved working with my podcast co-hosts, and I loved interviewing people. It was so fulfilling.
Yeah.
But it is sort of you have to say no to some things so that you can say a more wholehearted yes to
Yes.
others. I think that is
Yeah.
just a fact of life.
Yeah.
And we want to say yes to everything, but then we're kind of saying no to everything because we're just
Yeah.
stretched in too many
Yeah.
directions. And so figuring out what you can say no to so that you can really be present for the things that
Yeah.
really deeply matter to you. And I
Yeah.
mean, I actually did do the eulogy exercise, which is a very
Yeah.
classic acceptance and commitment therapy exercise. And I thought, do I want it to say podcaster on my tombstone or writer? And I was like, no, I think I wanted to say writer. That for me is
Yeah.
so fundamental to what I wanna stand for.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be different for everybody, but it was a clear choice, but it was a very hard choice.
Yeah. Absolutely. And takes courage, right? Because you were stepping from something you knew into something you didn't know.
Yeah.
So good on you. Oh, you're speaking my language, Yael. Speaking my language. Love it. So let's get back to, if you were to meet your 80-year-old self today, what would she say to you now?
I'd think she would say, "I'm glad you're having so much fun." I really
That's
enjoy my
fantastic.
life. What's so my mother is, she's 76, and I recently was talking to her, and she led a really different life than I lead. She was a stay-at-home parent and, an immigrant, and I think, felt like a lot of the opportunities that I have were just not available to her, and
Yeah.
I don't know if it's envy so much, but she made this comment, she's so that it's not exactly my 80-year-old self, but it's my mother who's close to 80, and she said, "Your life is just so interesting." And I was like, "Yeah,
Uh,
I love having an interesting life."
yeah.
And to me, that's really fun. Like, I'm tired at the end of the day, but I think my 80-year-old self would be glad that I was doing such
Yeah.
interesting, fun things.
Yeah. Good on you for creating that for yourself.
We'll see how
Yeah.
it goes. I am, like, still uncertain how this whole writing thing is gonna unfold, but I'm giving it a go.
Yeah. Fantastic. So, if people want to find out more about you, and I will put links in the show notes, where would be the best place for them to come and seek you out?
So I have a website, yaelschonbrun.com, yaelschonbrun.com, and through there you can see links to a bunch of my popular press writing, um, links to my newsletter, which is a free weekly newsletter called Relational Riffs that's hosted on Substack, and other information like about my private practice. So you can go find me there. I'm a little bit
Fantastic.
on social media, but not very much.
Oh, yeah, well, it's been such a pleasure, and I'm sure there's some absolute nuggets of gold that people will be able to take away from this. Thank you so much again for coming back and for being my first return guest.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Haley. I love speaking with you. I really do wish that we lived closer together because I would wanna take you out for coffee, once a week or something.
Oh, that's so
Get some of
lovely.
that Haley wisdom.
Oh, so lovely. You take care. We'll speak again soon.
I hope so. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye. Thank you for sharing this time with me today. I hope our time together has been helpful and supportive. If there has been something in this episode that you have found helpful, I invite you to share it with another person you think might benefit. If you've benefited in any way from the podcast, please do me a favour and show my pod some love by giving it a 5-star rating and review. Ratings, reviews and shares really help to increase awareness and reach of the podcast, allowing this helpful information to be spread more widely. All reviews are welcome and much appreciated. And if you do share on socials, remember to tag me so I can see who's listening, because you never really know over here in podcast land, and I can reach out personally to say thank you. If you'd like to be notified when the next episode airs, please use the link in the show notes to join our mailing list. If you have any particular topics you'd like to learn more about, or guests you'd like to hear from, please reach out and let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Music and editing by Nissa Ray. Thanks, Nissa. I wish you all well in your relationship with yourself and your business. May you go well and go gently. And remember, if you thrive, your business will too.